Imagine waking on the surface of Mars, your eyes open inside a habitat module no larger than a shipping container. Through the small reinforced window you see the Martian dawn, not bright and warm like Earth's sunrise, but cold and distant, the sun appearing 40% smaller in a sky that shifts from butterscotch to pale salmon. Beyond the glass stretches an endless desert of rust-coloured regolith, punctuated by ancient craters and wind-carved rocks that have waited in silence for 4 billion years. You are 140 million miles from home, from anyone you've ever loved, from every forest, ocean, and breathable atmosphere you've ever known. If something goes wrong, there is no rescue mission, no ambulance, no hospital. Help is at minimum 6 months away, if it comes at all. This is the dream we've been sold, a dream wrapped in adventure and progress, painted in the bold colours of human destiny. But what if this dream is built on foundations of sand? For decades, billionaires, space agencies and visionaries have promised us Mars. They speak of colonies, of terraforming, of humanity becoming a multi-planetary species. The rhetoric is intoxicating. Elon Musk envisions 1 million people on Mars by 2050. NASA publishes roadmaps. Children draw pictures of domed cities beneath alien skies. We have been told, repeatedly, that Mars colonization is not just possible, but inevitable, the next logical chapter in human exploration. But tonight, we must ask a different question. What if everything we have been told is built on dangerous assumptions? What if the obstacles are not merely technical challenges waiting to be solved, but fundamental barriers rooted in biology, physics, and economic reality? What if Mars is not a frontier to be conquered, but a warning we have chosen not to hear? This documentary exists to examine the brutal truth that lie beneath the optimistic veneer, not to crush wonder, but to honour it with honesty, to separate science fiction from science fact, to walk through the darkness that mission planners discuss only in closed rooms, the radiation levels that shred DNA, the bone density loss that cannot be reversed, the psychological toll of isolation so complete it rewrites human consciousness. These are not minor inconveniences, they are existential threats, each one capable of ending the Martian dream before it truly begins. We have been promised a future among the stars, but we have not been told the cost. Not the financial cost alone, though that too is staggering, but the human cost. The cost measured in bodies broken by low gravity, in minds fractured by confinement, in supply chains so fragile that a single failed resupply mission could mean mass death on another world. Tonight, we will not look away from these realities. We will face them directly, with the same courage we claim to need for interplanetary travel. Before we continue, I want to know, where are you watching this from? What time is it? Where you are? Drop a comment below and let's build a community of people who value truth as much as we value dreams. Whether it's midnight in Tokyo, afternoon in Berlin, or dawn in California, we're all here together, looking up at the same distant red light in the sky, asking the same questions about what it means to be human in an inhospitable universe. Tonight, we will journey through 6 categories of insurmountable challenges, each one a wall between humanity and a Martian future. We will examine the invisible radiation that bombards the planet's surface, the physiological breakdown that occurs in low gravity and thin atmosphere, the resource scarcity that makes survival a constant battle against entropy, the tyranny of distance that turns medical emergencies into death sentences, the economic impossibility that no government or corporation will admit, and finally, the philosophical delusion that perhaps we have been asking the wrong questions all along. Mars is beautiful from Earth. Let us see if it remains beautiful when we look unflinchingly at what it would take to live there. Let us begin. Mars appears before us in telescopes and rover images as a red desert waiting to be explored, a frontier beckoning humanity forward. But what these images cannot show, what no camera can capture, is the invisible storm that rages across its surface every moment of every day. It is silent, unseen, and absolutely lethal. This is the radiation nightmare that would greet any human who dared to stand beneath Martian skies. Unlike Earth, Mars offers no protection from the cosmos. No shield guards its surface. No atmosphere thick enough to matter wraps around it. The planet is naked before the universe, and the universe is not kind. To understand Mars's radiation environment is to first understand what Earth so effortlessly provides. Our home planet is wrapped in a powerful magnetic field generated deep within its liquid iron core. This invisible fortress extends tens of thousands of miles into space, deflecting the charged particles that stream constantly from the Sun. Beyond this magnetic shield, Earth's thick atmosphere adds another layer of protection, absorbing and scattering cosmic rays before they can reach the surface. Together, these two systems reduce radiation exposure to levels that allow life not just to survive but to flourish. We walk beneath open skies without fear because our planet is armored. Mars has neither gift. Mars lost its magnetic field billions of years ago when its core cooled and solidified. Without the churning liquid metal needed to generate protective magnetism, the planet became defenseless. The solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles ejected by the Sun, slowly stripped away most of Mars' atmosphere over geological time. What remains is less than 1% the density of Earth's atmosphere, a barrier so thin it may as well not exist. The result is a world where radiation arrives unfiltered, undiminished, directly from the void. To stand on Mars is to stand exposed to the full fury of cosmic radiation in a way no human on Earth has ever experienced. The numbers are not theoretical. They are measured, documented, and deeply alarming. Astronauts on the International Space Station, protected by Earth's magnetic field despite being in space, receive about 144 millisieverts of radiation per year. That exposure is already considered significant, requiring strict time limits on missions and continuous medical monitoring. On Mars, the radiation dose is approximately 700 times higher than what we experience on Earth's surface. A colonist living on Mars would receive roughly 300 millisieverts per year, and that is in the best-case scenario, assuming some shelter. In the open, during a solar particle event, exposure could spike to levels that cause acute radiation sickness within hours. These invisible killers come in two primary forms, each with its own method of destroying human tissue. Galactic cosmic rays are high-energy particles, primarily protons and atomic nuclei, that originate from outside our solar system. They travel at nearly the speed of our light, carrying so much energy that they can penetrate deeply into matter. Spacecraft hulls, habitat walls, spacesuits, even the human body offer little resistance. When these particles strike living cells, they shatter DNA strands, create cascades of secondary radiation, and leave trails of damage through tissue like microscopic bullets. The human body has mechanisms to repair DNA damage, but cosmic rays inflict wounds faster than biology can heal them. Over time, this accumulates. Cancer rates would skyrocket. Cognitive function would decline. Cellular aging would accelerate. Then there are solar particle events, sudden eruptions from the sun that release massive quantities of protons and heavier ions into space. These storms are unpredictable and devastating. On Earth, our magnetic field deflects them. On Mars, they arrive unimpeded. During a major solar event, radiation levels on the Martian surface can increase 100-fold within minutes. Any colonist caught outside during such an event, even in a spacesuit, would be exposed to a potentially lethal dose before they could reach shelter. The spacesuit fabric, the layers of insulation, the rigid helmet, all would be as transparent to these particles as glass is to sunlight. A solar storm on Mars would not be a weather event to observe. It would be a death sentence for anyone unprepared. Current shielding technology is woefully inadequate. On Earth, we shield against radiation using dense materials, lead, concrete, thick layers of water. In space, mass is the enemy. Every kilogram of shielding must be launched from Earth at enormous cost, or mined and processed on Mars using infrastructure that does not yet exist. Engineers have calculated that truly effective radiation shielding would require several meters of regolith, Martian soil, piled above and around habitats. Water walls could help, but would need to be equally thick. Even then, secondary radiation produced when cosmic rays collide with shielding material would still penetrate living spaces. There is no perfect barrier. No amount of material we can realistically construct would reduce radiation to Earth-like levels. Some proposals suggest building habitats inside lava tubes or beneath the Martian surface, using the planet itself as a shield. This could reduce radiation exposure significantly, perhaps to levels comparable to the International Space Station. But this solution comes with its own nightmare. It means humanity's grand vision of colonizing Mars, of walking red deserts under alien skies, of building cities and green houses bathed in Martian sunlight, must be abandoned. Instead, colonists would live as moles, buried in darkness, sealed in underground bunkers, venturing to the surface only when absolutely necessary and never for long. The psychological toll of such existence is difficult to overstate. Humans evolved under open skies, bathed in sunlight, connected to landscapes that stretched to horizons. To trade Earth's beauty for a radiation-shielded cave on Mars is not liberation. It is a prison sentence. The comparison to Earth's worst nuclear disasters makes the danger visceral. After the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, cleanup workers, known as liquidators, entered the contaminated zone to contain the reactor and minimize further damage. These individuals received radiation doses ranging from 100 to 500 millisieverts over the course of their work, exposure that led to significantly increased cancer rates and long-term health consequences. The Fukushima disaster in 2011 exposed workers to similar doses under emergency conditions. These events are remembered as catastrophic precisely because of the radiation exposure involved. On Mars, colonists would receive comparable or higher doses, not in weeks during a crisis, but continuously, month after month, year after year. Living on Mars would be like living inside a slow-motion nuclear disaster, one that never ends. Perhaps the most heartbreaking consequence of Mars's radiation environment is what it means for human reproduction. The dream of a Martian colony includes families, children born under rust-colored skies, a new branch of humanity taking root among the stars. But radiation and pregnancy are fundamentally incompatible. During fetal development, cells divide rapidly, DNA replicates constantly, and even minor damage can result in catastrophic developmental defects. On Earth, pregnant women are advised to avoid even medical X-rays whenever possible. On Mars, a developing fetus would be bombarded with radiation thousands of times more intense day after day for 9 months. The result would be miscarriages, severe birth defects, and genetic damage that could persist across generations. No ethical framework could justify conceiving a child in such an environment. Mars cannot be a home for humanity if humanity cannot be born there. Even if adults accepted the cancer risk, the cognitive decline, the shortened lifespans, the question remains, for how long? Studies of astronauts on long-duration missions have already revealed troubling signs. High-energy particles passing through the brain damage neurons, disrupt synaptic connections, and impair cognitive function. Memory suffers, reaction times slow. Decision-making abilities decline. For a Mars colonist, these effects would accumulate over years, steadily eroding the mental sharpness required to survive in such a hostile environment. Mistakes in such a place are not forgiving. A moment of confusion, a delayed response, a forgotten procedure could mean the difference between life and death. As radiation slowly degrades the minds of colonists, their ability to maintain complex life support systems, make critical repairs, and respond to emergencies would diminish. A colony that begins with brilliant engineers and scientists could, within a decade, become a community struggling with impaired cognition, unable to maintain the very technology keeping them alive. The engineering challenges of shielding are not simply difficult, they may be impossible at scale. Protecting a small habitat for a handful of people is one thing. Protecting an entire colony with industrial facilities, greenhouses, transportation networks, and all the infrastructure needed for long-term survival is another. Every structure would need meters-thick shielding. Every vehicle would need to be radiation-hardened. Every tunnel, every corridor, every workspace would require mass overhead. The amount of material that would need to be moved, processed, and positioned is staggering, requiring machinery, energy, and labor on a scale far beyond current capabilities. And all of this must happen on a planet with no existing infrastructure, no breathable air, and no liquid water at the surface. The radiation problem is not a single obstacle. It is a pervasive fundamental barrier that touches every aspect of Martian colonization. Some argue that future technologies will solve the problem. Magnetic shields generated artificially, advanced materials that deflect cosmic rays, biotechnology that enhances human resistance to radiation. These ideas exist in theoretical papers and science fiction, but not in laboratories or engineering workshops. Magnetic field generation on a planetary scale would require energy outputs comparable to entire nations' electrical grids, sustained continuously, forever. Materials that can effectively block cosmic rays without adding prohibitive mass remain purely speculative. And while biotechnology advances rapidly, asking it to make humans immune to high-energy particles tearing through DNA is asking biology to defy physics. Hope is not a strategy. Optimism is not engineering. The radiation nightmare is real, measured, and waiting. There is also the psychological dimension that cannot be ignored. Imagine explaining to a child born on Mars, assuming such a thing were even possible, that they can never go outside without layers of protection, that the sky itself is hostile, that sunlight is not warmth, but danger. Imagine the mental burden of knowing that every moment spent above ground shortens your life, increases your cancer risk, damages your brain. The constant awareness of invisible danger would create a state of perpetual anxiety. Radiation is not like a predator you can see and avoid. It is not like weather that eventually passes. It is always there, always penetrating, always harming. To live under such conditions is to live in a state of slow existential dread, a countdown you cannot stop. Comparisons to Antarctic research stations or submarine crews fall short. Those environments are difficult, isolated and psychologically demanding, but they are not inherently lethal. Submariners know that the ocean, while dangerous, is not slowly killing them at the cellular level. Antarctic researchers know they can return home to full health. Mars colonists would have no such assurance. Every day spent on Mars would be a day of irreversible harm, accumulating damage that could never be undone. The psychological toll of such knowledge, lived year after year, would be crushing. The radiation nightmare also undermines one of the central justifications for Mars colonization, the idea of becoming a multiplanetary species to ensure humanity's survival. If Mars radiation makes long-term habitation so hazardous that colonists face drastically shortened lifespans, cognitive decline, and reproductive impossibility, then Mars does not offer survival. It offers a slow extinction in a different location. A civilization cannot sustain itself if its members cannot reproduce, cannot think clearly, and cannot live long enough to pass on knowledge and culture. Mars in its current state is not a lifeboat. It is a death trap with a longer fuse. What makes this particularly tragic is that Mars looks so tantalizingly close to habitable. It has water ice, a day length similar to Earth's, temperatures that, while cold, are not absolute extremes. In many ways, it is the best candidate in our solar system beyond Earth. And yet, the radiation environment alone may render it permanently unsuitable for human colonization. We can send robots, we can conduct research, we can study its geology and search for signs of ancient life. But living there, raising families there, building a civilization there, the radiation makes it a fantasy. As our journey through the solar system continues, we carry this uncomfortable truth with us. Mars is not simply difficult. It is hostile in ways that no amount of engineering may overcome. The invisible storm of radiation that has scoured its surface for billions of years shows no sign of relenting. And until we develop technologies that currently exist only in imagination, or fundamentally alter what it means to be human, Mars will remain what it has always been, a beautiful, distant, and ultimately deadly world. The radiation nightmare is not a problem to be solved. It is a reality to be accepted, and acceptance, however painful, is the first step toward asking better questions about where humanity's future truly lies. The human body is a masterpiece sculpted by gravity. For 4 billion years, life on Earth has evolved under the constant pull of 9.8 meters per second squared. Every bone, every muscle fiber, every heartbeat has been shaped by this invisible force. Our skeleton is designed to support our weight. Our cardiovascular system pumps blood upward against gravity's pull. Our inner ear maintains balance through the precise movement of tiny crystals suspended in fluid. We are not merely adapted to Earth's gravity, we are inseparable from it. To remove a human being from Earth's gravitational embrace is not simply to relocate them. It is to fundamentally challenge the architecture of their existence. Mars offers only 38% of Earth's gravitational force. To stand on the Martian surface is to weigh barely more than a third of what you weigh on Earth. At first, this might seem liberating, effortless, even elegant. But gravity is not a burden we carry. It is the sculptor of our bodies, the force that maintains our structural integrity. Without it, the human form begins to unravel. Bone density loss on Mars would begin almost immediately. On Earth, Our bones constantly rebuild themselves through a process called remodeling. When we walk, run, or simply stand, mechanical stress signals our bones to maintain their density and strength. Remove that stress, and the body interprets it as unnecessary maintenance. Bone tissue begins to dissolve, leaching calcium into the bloodstream at a rate that would be catastrophic over time. Studies of astronauts aboard the International Space Station reveal bone density loss of 1 to 2% per month in weight-bearing bones. On Mars, with its weak gravity, the loss would be slower than in microgravity, but relentless nonetheless. The hips, spine and legs would become increasingly fragile, porous, brittle like ancient wood left to decay in silence. Within months, a Mars colonist's skeleton would begin to resemble that of an elderly osteoporosis patient. Within a year or two, bones could become so weakened that simple activities like climbing stairs or lifting equipment could result in fractures. The calcium flooding into the bloodstream creates its own dangers, increasing the risk of kidney stones and cardiovascular calcification. The body, designed for Earth, begins to cannibalize itself in the weak gravity of an alien world. But bone loss is only the beginning. Muscle atrophy follows close behind. Our muscles exist in constant dialogue with gravity, contracting and relaxing to maintain posture, to move, to exist. On Mars, this conversation becomes a whisper. Without the resistance of full Earth gravity, muscles begin to waste away. Studies show astronauts can lose up to 20% of their muscle mass during extended missions, particularly in the legs and lower back. Even with rigorous daily exercise, the deterioration continues. On Mars, colonists would need to exercise for hours each day simply to slow the inevitable decline, yet they could never fully prevent it. The body's muscular architecture would gradually transform, adapting to a world it was never meant to inhabit. Perhaps most concerning is what happens to the cardiovascular system. On Earth, our hearts work continuously against gravity to pump blood upward to the brain. This constant resistance keeps the heart strong and maintains proper blood pressure regulation. In reduced gravity, the heart begins to atrophy like any underused muscle. It becomes smaller, weaker, less efficient. Blood pressure regulation becomes impaired as the body recalibrates for a lower gravity environment. Astronauts returning from space often experience orthostatic intolerance, the inability to stand without fainting as blood pools in their legs. The heart, reshaped by months or years on Mars, would struggle to function properly if a colonist ever attempted to return to Earth. This brings us to perhaps the most haunting aspect of Mars colonization, the point of no return. Current research suggests there may be a threshold beyond which human physiology adapts so completely to Martian conditions that return to Earth becomes physically impossible. After 2 to 3 years on Mars, the combined effects of bone loss, muscle atrophy, and cardiovascular deconditioning could render a person unable to survive Earth's gravity. They would not simply feel heavy. They would be crushed under their own weight. Their weakened heart would struggle to pump blood against Earth's pull. Their brittle bones would fracture under ordinary stress. They would have become, in essence, Martian, a human body transformed into something that can only exist in reduced gravity. To commit to Mars might be to commit forever. There would be no coming home. The physiological damage extends beyond the musculoskeletal system. Fluid shifts in low gravity create a cascade of problems that affect vision and brain function. On Earth, gravity pulls fluids downward into our legs and lower body. In space, or on Mars, these fluids redistribute upward, causing facial puffiness and increasing pressure within the skull. This condition, known as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, has already affected numerous astronauts on long-duration missions. The increased intracranial pressure flattens the eyeballs, causes swelling of the optic nerve, and leads to vision changes that can become permanent. Some astronauts have returned from 6-month missions with degraded eyesight that never fully recovered. On Mars, this pressure would persist indefinitely. Colonists might face progressive, irreversible vision loss with no treatment available. The human eye, evolved under Earth's gravity, would be slowly deformed by the alien conditions of another world. The immune system, our body's ancient defense against infection and disease, also falters in space. The combination of low gravity and radiation exposure creates what scientists call immune dysregulation. White blood cell counts become abnormal. The production and distribution of immune cells becomes impaired. Wound healing slows dramatically. Dormant viruses like herpes simplex that remain inactive in healthy individuals on Earth can reactivate in space, causing outbreaks. On Mars, with its constant radiation bombardment and reduced gravity, colonists would face a perfect storm of immune suppression. Minor infections could become life-threatening. A simple cut could refuse to heal, becoming a festering wound in an environment where advanced medical care would be nearly impossible. And what of reproduction? The dream of a self-sustaining Mars colony depends entirely on the ability to have children there. Yet we have no definitive understanding of whether human reproduction is even possible in reduced gravity. The hormonal cycles that govern fertility are influenced by gravitational cues we barely understand. Sperm motility and egg development might be affected. Even if conception were possible, the entire process of gestation is a delicate interplay of fluid dynamics, cellular development, and gravitational forces. A developing fetus experiences gravity from the moment of conception, influencing how organs form, how the skeleton develops, how blood circulates. We have never observed mammalian pregnancy in reduced gravity for the simple reason that we don't know if it's survivable. A child conceived and born on Mars might face catastrophic developmental abnormalities. Their bones might form incorrectly. Their hearts might develop inadequate strength. They could be born fragile, unable to ever leave the planet of their birth, children of Mars with bodies designed for a world they would never be strong enough to leave. The psychological toll of Mars colonization would be equally devastating. Humans are social creatures, evolved in communities, under open skies, with the rhythms of day and night governed by a 24-hour cycle. Mars offers none of these comforts. The day-night cycle on Mars is only 37 minutes longer than Earth's, but the dim sunlight and lack of a proper atmosphere would make natural light inadequate. Colonists would live in sealed habitats, breathing recycled air, seeing the same walls, the same faces day after day, month after month, year after year. The isolation would be absolute. Earth would be visible in the sky, but impossibly distant. A communication delay of up to 22 minutes each way means conversations with loved ones would be impossible. Every message would be a recording. Every interaction would be asynchronous, delayed, disconnected. Studies of Antarctic research stations and submarine crews reveal that even short periods of isolation in confined spaces lead to depression, anxiety, interpersonal conflicts, and cognitive decline. The phenomenon known as the third quarter effect shows that psychological difficulties peak during the middle phase of long-duration missions, when the initial excitement has faded and the end still seems impossibly far away. On Mars there would be no end, no rotation home, no relief crew arriving after a few months. only the endless monotony of survival in a hostile environment. Sleep disorders would become endemic as the altered light conditions and chronic stress disrupt circadian rhythms. Without proper sleep, cognitive function deteriorates, decision-making becomes impaired, and the risk of accidents increases dramatically. Some colonists would inevitably develop serious psychiatric conditions, depression, anxiety disorders, and even psychosis could emerge, yet psychiatric medication supplies would be limited and eventually exhausted. Psychotherapy would be conducted via delayed video messages with Earth-based therapists who could never fully understand the unique stresses of Martian existence. In extreme cases, a colonist experiencing a severe mental health crisis could pose a danger to themselves and others, yet there would be no psychiatric hospital, no secure facility, no way to safely manage someone in acute psychological distress within the constraints of a small, isolated habitat. And then there is the medical infrastructure problem. On Earth, we take for granted the vast network of specialized care available within hours of anywhere on the planet. Emergency rooms, surgical suites, intensive care units, diagnostic equipment, specialists in every conceivable medical field. Mars would have none of this. A Mars colony, at least in its early decades, would have minimal medical facilities, perhaps a single general practitioner with limited surgical training, basic diagnostic tools, and a finite supply of medications. Complex surgeries would be nearly impossible. A burst appendix, a severe infection, internal bleeding from an accident, any of these could become a death sentence. The radiation exposure that every colonist would endure creates an ongoing cancer risk that would require sophisticated screening and treatment. On Earth, cancer patients have access to surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, immunotherapy, and experimental treatments. On Mars, a cancer diagnosis would likely be terminal. There would be no radiation oncologists, no surgical oncology teams, no advanced imaging to guide treatment. Colonists would watch themselves slowly die, knowing that the cure exists but is 140 million miles away, accessible only to those who could survive the journey back, which their weakened bodies likely could not. Pregnancy complications would be similarly catastrophic. On Earth, high-risk pregnancies are managed with constant monitoring, emergency caesarean sections when needed, neonatal intensive care for premature infants. On Mars, a difficult birth could mean the death of both mother and child. There would be no blood banks for transfusions, no NICU for struggling newborns, no specialist to handle complications. The act of bringing new life into the world, celebrated throughout human history, would become a terrifying gamble with death. Even dental care presents insurmountable challenges. A severe toothache on Mars could escalate into a life-threatening infection with no oral surgeon available. We live in an age where we can replace hearts, reconstruct faces, and reattach severed limbs. But on Mars, even minor medical emergencies could prove fatal simply because the infrastructure, the specialists, and the equipment would not exist. The human body, magnificent in its complexity, is fundamentally earthbound. We are creatures of this specific gravity, this specific atmosphere, this specific magnetic field. To transport humans to Mars is not simply to relocate them. It is to subject them to a slow, inevitable physiological degradation. The body begins to fail in ways both visible and invisible. Bones dissolve, muscles waste, the heart weakens, vision deteriorates, the immune system falters, the mind fractures under isolation and stress. And unlike the explorers of Earth's past who could always return home, those who journey to Mars may find that their bodies have transformed so completely that Earth is no longer a home they can survive. The Martian dream promises transformation, but not the kind its advocates imagine. It promises the transformation of the human body from a terrestrial marvel into an alien form, weakened, fragile, trapped between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Mars stretches before us, a rusty expanse of ancient regolith and frozen silence. Beneath its surface lies water, locked in ice, waiting to sustain a human presence. Or so the narrative goes. But water on Mars is not a resource. It is challenge wrapped in layers of impossibility, buried under permafrost in a world where the very act of survival demands energy we cannot easily generate, an infrastructure we have not yet invented. To speak of living on Mars is to speak of extracting life from a corpse, of wringing sustenance from a planet that has been dead for billions of years. The dream promises self-sufficiency. The reality is an endless trap of scarcity, where every resource requires 10 more to obtain and every solution creates a dozen new problems. Water, the foundation of life, exists on Mars. This much is true. Satellites have detected vast quantities of ice beneath the polar caps and scattered in deposits across the mid-latitudes. Some estimates suggest there is enough water ice on Mars to cover the entire planet in an ocean several feet deep. But knowing water exists and actually using it are separated by a chasm of technological and energetic impossibility. The water is not liquid. It is frozen solid in temperatures that regularly plunge to minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit, locked beneath layers of dust and regolith, mixed with salts and perchlorates that make it toxic to human biology. Extracting this water would require drilling or excavating through meters of frozen ground, using equipment that must function in extreme cold, in an atmosphere that offers no protection from radiation or thermal shock. The machinery would need constant heating to prevent its components from freezing and shattering. Once extracted, the ice must be melted, a process requiring enormous amounts of energy in an environment where heat dissipates rapidly into the thin atmosphere. Then it must be purified, filtered to remove the toxic perchlorates that permeate Martian soil, chemicals so corrosive they would poison any biological system. And after all this effort, after all this energy expenditure, the water must be stored in pressurized heated tanks to prevent it from immediately refreezing or sublimating into vapor in the low atmospheric pressure. A single leak, a single equipment failure, and days or weeks of energy and labor evaporate into the Martian sky. This is not farming a well. This is fighting thermodynamics itself, an endless battle against a planet that wants everything to freeze, to sublime, to return to dust. The fantasy of Martian water extraction assumes technology that does not yet exist at the scale required. It assumes energy abundance on a world that offers none. It assumes reliability in systems that must operate flawlessly in the harshest environment humans have ever attempted to inhabit. One broken heating element, one failed pump, one fractured pipeline, and the water supply collapses. And with it, so does everything else. Oxygen presents an even more immediate crisis. Humans can survive weeks without food, days without water, but only minutes without oxygen. Every breath on Mars must be manufactured, extracted from an atmosphere that is 95% carbon dioxide, less than 1% oxygen, and so thin it might as well be vacuum. The process requires machinery, energy, and perfect reliability. There is no room for error. A failed oxygen generator is not an inconvenience. It is a death sentence counted in heartbeats. Technologies like MOXIE, tested on recent Mars missions, can produce oxygen by splitting carbon dioxide molecules through high-temperature electrolysis. But these systems are experimental, small-scale, and energy-intensive. Scaling them up to support even a handful of humans requires massive power inputs, redundant backup systems, and constant maintenance. Each colonist needs roughly 2 pounds of oxygen per day. A colony of 100 people requires 200 pounds daily, over 70,000 pounds per year. The machinery to produce this must run continuously, without failure, in an environment where temperatures fluctuate wildly. Dust infiltrates every mechanism and radiation degrades electronic components over time, and this machinery cannot simply be turned on and left alone. It requires filters that clog with Martian dust. It requires replacement parts that wear out under constant use. It requires energy that must be generated from somewhere, stored somehow, and distributed without loss. The oxygen generation system is not a device. It is an entire industrial infrastructure, one that must be established before humans even arrive, and must continue operating perfectly every single day, forever. One extended dust storm that blocks solar panels, one reactor malfunction, one supply chain disruption from Earth, and the oxygen stops flowing. The colonists have minutes to fix the problem or seal themselves into emergency shelters with limited reserves. This is not survival. This is being perpetually moments away from suffocation. Food on Mars is perhaps the cruelest illusion of all. The vision shows greenhouses filled with crops, thriving under artificial light, sustained by Martian water and recycled nutrients. It is an image borrowed from science fiction, beautiful and entirely detached from the brutal reality of Martian agriculture. Martian soil is not dirt. It is regolith, a toxic dust laden with perchlorates, sharp-edged particles, and no organic matter whatsoever. It cannot support life. It must be cleaned, processed, and amended with nutrients before a single seed could even attempt to germinate. Growing food requires light, but Mars receives only 43% of the sunlight that reaches Earth, and even that is filtered through frequent dust storms that can last weeks or months, plunging the surface into near-total darkness. Artificial lighting becomes essential, but growing crops under LEDs requires staggering amounts of electricity. A single acre of greenhouse crops on Earth uses energy equivalent to several average homes. On Mars, with reduced solar efficiency and the need for heating, pressurization, and climate control, that energy demand multiplies exponentially. There are no pollinators on Mars, no bees, no windborne pollen dispersal in the thin atmosphere. Every plant must be hand-pollinated or mechanically pollinated, an additional labour burden on colonists already stretched to the limits of endurance. Temperature regulation is another nightmare. Martian surface temperatures swing from relatively mild during the day to lethally cold at night. Greenhouses must be heated constantly, insulated perfectly, and pressurized to prevent the water in plant cells from boiling away in the low atmospheric pressure. And even if crops can be grown, the nutritional yield is limited. Lettuce and potatoes, the most commonly proposed Martian crops, provide calories, but lack the full spectrum of nutrients humans need for long-term health. Variety requires space, energy, and biological complexity that a struggling colony cannot afford. Malnutrition becomes inevitable. Deficiencies accumulate. The human body, already weakened by radiation and low gravity, begins to fail from within. Every failed crop is not just a setback, it is a famine. There is no backup farm down the road, no neighbouring region to trade with. When the greenhouse fails, people starve, and the greenhouse will fail, because complex biological systems always do, especially when subjected to conditions they never evolved to withstand. Energy is the ghost that haunts every Martian survival system. Nothing works without power, and Mars offers no easy source of it. Solar panels, the most commonly proposed solution, generate 40% less electricity on Mars than they do on Earth, due to the greater distance from the Sun. Dust accumulation reduces their efficiency further, requiring constant cleaning, which itself requires labour, equipment and water. Dust storms can block sunlight for weeks, rendering solar power useless precisely when it is needed most, when heating and life support demands are highest. Nuclear reactors offer an alternative, but they are not simple plug-and-play devices. They require massive infrastructure, shielding, cooling systems and fuel that must either be brought from Earth or manufactured on Mars using processes that themselves require energy. A single small reactor might power a modest base, but scaling up to support agriculture, manufacturing and expanding populations requires multiple reactors, each a potential point of failure, each demanding maintenance and oversight by specialists who may not survive the journey. Energy storage is another compounding problem. Batteries degrade. They lose capacity in extreme cold. They require rare materials that must be imported or mined and refined on Mars using energy and equipment that do not yet exist. Every system depends on energy, and energy depends on systems that are fragile, limited, and insufficient. The energy budget of a Martian colony is arithmetic of desperation. Life support, water extraction, oxygen generation, food production, heating, computing, communications, each draws from a pool that is never deep enough. Priorities must be constantly balanced. Sacrifices must be made. And when the energy runs low, people begin to choose what gets to keep running and what gets shut down. Those are not technical decisions, they are life and death decisions. Manufacturing and repair introduce yet another layer of inescapable dependency. On Earth, a broken tool is an inconvenience. On Mars, it is a crisis. Every piece of equipment, every component, every seal and valve and circuit board is critical, and all of them will break. Metal fatigues under thermal stress. Plastics become brittle in the cold and radiation. Electronics fail as cosmic rays flip bits in memory chips and degrade semiconductors. Repairing these failures requires spare parts, and spare parts require manufacturing capability. But manufacturing requires raw materials, refinement processes, precision tools, and energy. Building a 3D printer for spare parts sounds simple until you realize it requires feedstock materials, which require mining and refining, which require excavation equipment, smelters, and chemical processing plants. Each of these requires more equipment, more energy, more expertise. A torn spacesuit is not a minor inconvenience. It is a life-threatening emergency. Suits must be patched, seals must be replaced, fabrics must be repaired with materials that can withstand extreme cold, radiation, and abrasion. If the colony cannot manufacture suit fabric, it must import it from Earth. If a critical tool breaks and cannot be replaced, entire operations halt. The exponential dependency problem emerges clearly here. Every survival system requires backup systems. Redundancy is not optional. It is the only thing standing between the colony and total collapse. But redundancy multiplies complexity. 2 oxygen generators require twice the maintenance, twice the spare parts, twice the energy. 3 water purifiers mean 3 times the points of failure. The web of dependencies grows denser and more fragile with every additional system, And because everything depends on everything else, a failure in one area cascades through the entire colony. A broken water pump stops ice extraction. No water means no oxygen production from certain backup methods. No oxygen means the greenhouse cannot be entered safely for maintenance. Failed crops mean malnutrition, which reduces colonists' ability to perform repairs. Reduced maintenance increases equipment failures. The spiral accelerates. This is not a sustainable system. It is a house of cards in a windstorm, held together by constant effort, perfect luck, and resources imported from another world. Which brings us to the ultimate trap, the import dependency that makes Martian colonization not a path to independence, but a chain of permanent subjugation to Earth. Every critical component, every specialized tool, every medication, every seed variety not yet adapted to Martian conditions, all must come from Earth. Resupply missions take months or years depending on orbital alignments. They cost billions of dollars. They are subject to political whims, economic downturns, and the possibility of catastrophic failure. A Martian colony would remain dependent on Earth for decades, possibly centuries, before it could achieve even partial self-sufficiency. And in that time, it would be economically unviable, producing nothing of value that could justify the cost of continuous support. Mars has no exports, no trade goods, no resource scarce enough on Earth to make extraction and transport profitable. The colony would be a financial black hole, draining resources indefinitely with no return. The resource scarcity trap is not a challenge to be overcome with better technology or more funding. It is the fundamental nature of trying to live on a dead planet. Mars offers nothing freely. Every molecule of water, every breath of oxygen, every calorie of food must be torn from a world that is hostile to life at every level. The energy cost is astronomical, the complexity is overwhelming, the fragility is absolute. Surviving on Mars is not living. It is an endless, exhausting battle against entropy, fought with inadequate tools in an environment designed to kill, and in the cold mathematics of that struggle the numbers do not add up. They never have. Mars hangs in the darkness, a red beacon calling across the void. To reach it is not merely a journey through space, but a confrontation with distance so profound it reshapes the meaning of isolation itself. The voyage to Mars is measured not just in miles, but in months of separation, years of commitment, and the terrifying silence that grows between words sent and received across the cosmic gulf. Here, distance becomes more than geometry. It becomes a prison without walls, a barrier constructed from the fundamental laws of physics themselves. The journey begins with the number that haunts every calculation: 140 million miles. This is the average distance between Earth and Mars, though depending on their orbits, that gap can shrink to 34 million miles at closest approach, or expand to 250 million miles when the planets sit on opposite sides of the Sun. Even at the closest alignment, travelling to Mars takes between 6 and 9 months using current propulsion technology. Unlike a flight across Earth's oceans, where rescue is hours away and communication is instant, the voyage to Mars unfolds in profound solitude. Every mile travelled adds seconds to the communication delay, stretching the tether to home until it becomes so thin that colonists must accept a new reality. They are fundamentally, irreversibly alone. Communication with Mars is not a conversation. It is an exchange of messages cast into the void, waiting in darkness for a reply that arrives long after the moment has passed. At Mars's closest approach to Earth, radio signals travelling at the speed of light take approximately 4 minutes to bridge the gap. At its farthest, that delay extends to 22 minutes. A round-trip communication, question and answer, takes between 8 and 44 minutes depending on orbital positions. This delay is not a technical inconvenience to be solved with better engineering. It is a fundamental constraint imposed by the speed of light itself, the universe's ultimate speed limit. Imagine the psychological weight of that silence. A colonist on Mars experiencing a medical emergency cannot call Earth for help and receive guidance in real time. By the time their distress signal reaches home and a response returns, crucial minutes have elapsed. Minutes that could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Every decision must be made locally, with whatever expertise and resources exist on Mars at that moment. There are no emergency consultations with specialists, no real-time troubleshooting of failing life support systems, no comforting voice to guide panicked hands through crisis. The communication lag transforms every problem into a solitary burden. But the isolation extends beyond emergencies. It permeates daily existence, severing the emotional connections that anchor human beings to their species. Conversations with loved ones on Earth become asynchronous exchanges, more like letters than dialogue. A parent cannot watch their child's first steps in real time, cannot respond to a partner's fears as they arise, cannot participate in the spontaneous flow of human connection. Every interaction is delayed, filtered through the tyranny of distance. Birthdays are celebrated alone. Crises are weathered without immediate support. Joys and sorrows arrive as recordings, moments already past by the time they're witnessed. The colonists become ghosts to those they left behind, and Earth becomes a ghost to them, a world of recorded voices speaking from the past. This communication lag creates profound psychological vulnerability. Human beings evolved in communities where social bonds are maintained through immediate interaction, through the subtle rhythms of conversation and presence. On Mars, those rhythms are broken. Studies of isolation in extreme environments, Antarctic bases, submarines, space stations, reveal that even with modern communication technology, prolonged separation from society produces anxiety, depression, and cognitive decline. Mars colonists would experience isolation orders of magnitude more severe, cut off not by distance measured in thousands of miles but in hundreds of millions, not for months but for years, possibly for life. The mind was not designed for such exile. Beyond communication, distance imposes another cruel constraint, the transfer window trap. Earth and Mars orbit the Sun at different speeds, and the alignment that allows efficient travel between them occurs only once every 26 months. This narrow window of opportunity lasts just a few weeks. Miss it, and the next chance lies more than 2 years away. For a Mars colony, this means that rescue missions, emergency resupply, or evacuation are not merely difficult. They are astronomically constrained by celestial mechanics beyond human control. Consider the implications: a catastrophic failure of life support systems, a deadly outbreak of disease, a critical shortage of food or medicine. Any of these scenarios could unfold with Earth watching helplessly, unable to launch assistance because the planets are not aligned. Even if a rescue mission were approved immediately, it would take months to prepare and launch, then 6 to 9 months to travel, meaning that help could arrive a year or more after crisis begins. By then, it would not be a rescue. It would be a recovery mission. The transfer window trap also means that colonists commit not to a single journey, but to a minimum stay of approximately 2 years before return is even physically possible. Unlike explorers of Earth's poles or astronauts aboard the International Space Station, who can abort missions and return home within days or weeks, Mars colonists face an irreversible commitment. Once they depart Earth, they are bound to Mars for at least the next orbital cycle. There are no test runs, no trial periods, no emergency exits. The decision to go is absolute. This commitment occurs before colonists even set foot on Martian soil, because the journey itself is an ordeal that tests the limits of human endurance. 6 to 9 months in deep space, confined to a spacecraft smaller than a modest house, surrounded by vacuum and radiation. The psychological stress of such confinement is only part of the challenge. The human body, evolved under Earth's gravity, begins to deteriorate almost immediately in weightlessness. Bone density decreases at a rate of 1 to 2% per month in microgravity. Without the constant stress of supporting body weight against gravity, bones leach calcium into the bloodstream. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station, even with rigorous exercise regimens, lose significant bone mass during 6-month stays. Mars travelers would arrive at their destination with weakened skeletons, more vulnerable to fractures, less capable of the physical labor required to build and maintain a colony. Some of this bone loss can be recovered with time under Martian gravity, but Mars's gravity is only 38% that of Earth, insufficient to fully halt the deterioration. Colonists would face lifelong skeletal fragility. Muscle atrophy follows a similar trajectory. Without resistance, muscles waste away. The heart, no longer working against gravity to pump blood upward, becomes deconditioned. Astronauts returning from long-duration spaceflight often cannot stand unassisted, their cardiovascular systems unable to maintain blood pressure against Earth's gravity. On Mars, with its reduced gravity, colonists might manage, but their bodies would remain in a weakened state, caught between the gravity of two worlds and fully adapted to neither. Vision degrades. In microgravity, fluids shift toward the head, increasing intracranial pressure and causing the eyeball to flatten. Some astronauts develop permanent vision changes after long missions. Immune function weakens. Radiation exposure accumulates. The journey to Mars is not a passive crossing. It is an assault on human physiology, one that begins the moment travelers leave Earth's protective embrace, and continues every day until they arrive. And then there is the financial abyss. Distance from Earth is not only measured in time and space, but in cost. Current estimates suggest that launching payload to Mars costs approximately $1 million per kilogram. A single human being, along with the life support, food, water, equipment and habitat needed to sustain them, weighs far more than a kilogram. Even with optimistic assumptions about reusable rockets and economies of scale, the cost of transporting a small colony to Mars would run into the hundreds of billions, possibly trillions of dollars. For comparison, the International Space Station, orbiting just 250 miles above Earth, cost over $150 billion to construct and requires continuous resupply missions to maintain. Mars is 1,000 times farther away, with no possibility of rapid resupply and vastly harsher conditions. The financial commitment required to establish and sustain even a modest colony would dwarf any infrastructure project ever undertaken by humanity. And unlike projects on Earth, which can be paused, scaled back, or abandoned if funding dries up, a Mars colony would require sustained investment for decades, possibly centuries, before it could hope to become self-sufficient. This introduces the abandonment scenario, perhaps the most terrifying consequence of Mars's distance. History is filled with colonies that failed when support from home ceased. Early European settlements in the Americas Arctic expeditions, isolated research stations, all depended on continued commitment from distant sponsors. When that commitment waned due to economic collapse, political change, or simple loss of interest, the colonists were left to survive or perish on their own. Mars colonists would face this risk magnified to existential proportions. If Earth civilization experienced economic depression, war, pandemic, or environmental catastrophe, funding for Mars missions would evaporate. Political winds shift. Public enthusiasm fades. What seems like humanity's grandest adventure in one decade becomes an expensive distraction in the next, and once support ceases, distance ensures that there is no rescue, no evacuation, no hope of return. The colonists would be stranded on a dead world, millions of miles from help with dwindling supplies and failing equipment. Unlike terrestrial colonies, which could hunt, fish, or forage, Mars offers nothing. No rescue mission could be mounted in time. The transfer windows would come and go, opportunities missed because no one on Earth was willing to pay. The colonists would watch their life support systems slowly fail, knowing that home had abandoned them not out of cruelty, but out of indifference, out of the simple calculation that the cost of rescue exceeded the political will to pay it. This is not speculation. It is the logical conclusion of distance combined with human nature. We have abandoned research stations in Antarctica when funding dried up. We have cancelled ambitious space programs when priorities shifted. Mars colonists would have no reason to expect different treatment, except that for them, abandonment would not mean an uncomfortable evacuation. It would mean death, slow and inevitable beneath alien skies. The distance to Mars eliminates the possibility of test runs, the iterative process by which humanity has explored every other frontier. Antarctic bases can be evacuated in emergencies. The ISS crew can return to Earth within hours if necessary. Even remote oceanic research stations have the option of rescue. Mars offers none of these safeguards. The first colonists would be test subjects in an experiment with no control group, no abort option, and no second chances. Every system, every procedure, every assumption about long-term survival would be tested not in simulation, but in reality, with human lives as the stakes. If the colony's water recycling fails, if food production falls short, if psychological stress leads to violence or suicide, there is no reset button. The distance ensures that mistakes are permanent and consequences are irreversible. Mars sits in the darkness, beautiful and indifferent, calling to us across a gulf that is not merely physical but existential. The distance is not just space to be crossed, but time to be endured, communication to be delayed, crises to be faced alone, and cost to be borne by generations who may never see return on their investment. It is a tyranny written into the architecture of the solar system itself, a barrier that technology cannot eliminate, only mitigate. To journey to Mars is to accept exile. To colonize it is to gamble that Earth will care enough to keep the supply ships coming, that no disaster will interrupt the fragile chain of support, that distance will not become abandonment. It is a wager against the vastness of space and the fickleness of human commitment, and distance, patient and absolute, waits to see if we are willing to pay the price it demands. The rockets gleam in promotional videos, the habitats rise in computer-generated landscapes. Billionaires speak of humanity's destiny among the stars, and the vision shimmers with possibility. Yet beneath the spectacle of ambition lies a question so fundamental, so brutally practical, that it threatens to collapse the entire Martian dream. A question not of engineering or biology, but of economics and will. who will pay for Mars? And more importantly, why would they? The answer, when examined honestly, reveals a chasm between aspiration and reality so vast that no amount of enthusiasm can bridge it. Mars is not a destination waiting to be claimed. It is a money pit without bottom, a financial black hole that offers no return, no profit, and no tangible benefit to the civilizations expected to fund it. In the cold arithmetic of economics and the shifting winds of political priorities, the dream of Mars colonization does not merely face obstacles, it faces mathematical impossibility. To send humans to Mars and establish even a minimal outpost would require an investment measured not in billions, but in trillions of dollars. Conservative estimates place the cost of a sustained Mars program at somewhere between $2 and $10 trillion over several decades. To put this in perspective, the entire Apollo program, adjusted for inflation, cost approximately $280 billion and lasted just over a decade. Mars would require 10 to 30 times that investment, sustained not for years, but for generations. The International Space Station, humanity's most expensive single object ever constructed, has cost roughly $150 billion over its lifetime. A permanent Mars colony would dwarf that expenditure, requiring continuous funding with no end date, no completion milestone, and no moment when the costs finally stop. The first and most unforgiving reality is this: Mars offers nothing of economic value that justifies such an expense. There is no resource on Mars that cannot be obtained more easily, more cheaply, and with far less risk elsewhere. No rare minerals exist there that don't exist in greater abundance on Earth or in near-Earth asteroids. No economic activity could be conducted on Mars that couldn't be done better in Earth orbit or on the Moon, where rescue missions are measured in days rather than years, and where the infrastructure already partially exists. The dream of Martian mining operations or manufacturing facilities collapses under scrutiny. Why would any corporation invest trillions to extract resources from a planet 140 million miles away when the same materials orbit our planet at a fraction of the distance and cost? Even water, often cited as Mars' most valuable resource, presents no economic case. Ice exists on the Moon. Water can be synthesized or recycled in space stations. The idea that we would spend decades and trillions of dollars to access Martian ice for economic purposes is not visionary, it is absurd. Every kilogram of material brought back from Mars would cost millions of dollars, making even platinum or diamonds worthless by comparison to their terrestrial equivalents. Mars is not a gold rush waiting to happen. It is an economic desert offering nothing but expense. This brings us to the opportunity cost, a concept that haunts every discussion of Mars colonization, yet is rarely confronted directly. Every dollar spent on Mars is a dollar not spent elsewhere. The money required to establish even a small Martian outpost could transform life on Earth in ways both profound and immediate. Climate change, the defining crisis of our time, could be addressed with comprehensive renewable energy infrastructure, carbon capture technology, and ecosystem restoration programs. $2 trillion could eliminate extreme poverty globally, provide clean water and sanitation to every human on Earth, and fund medical research that would save millions of lives annually. It could build orbital infrastructure that makes space access routine and affordable, creating an economic foundation for genuine space expansion, rather than a symbolic gesture on a distant planet. The question is not whether we can afford Mars, it is whether we can justify Mars when so many pressing needs remain unmet. When coastal cities face flooding, when billions lack, basic resources, when our own planet's habitability hangs in the balance, the optics of spending trillions to make Mars barely survivable become politically and morally indefensible. The argument that we can do both, that we can solve Earth's problems while colonizing Mars, ignores the finite nature of resources and political will. In reality, Mars doesn't compete with other space programs. It competes with healthcare, education, infrastructure, and survival. History offers a sobering lesson about the fragility of expensive long-term space ambitions. The graveyard of cancelled programs is vast. After Apollo, the momentum that put humans on the moon evaporated within years. Plans for moon bases, Mars missions, and space stations were shelved as priorities shifted and budgets tightened. The space shuttle, meant to make space access routine and affordable, became an expensive, dangerous program that consumed NASA's budget for decades while accomplishing a fraction of its promised goals. Constellation, the program meant to return humans to the moon, was cancelled after billions were spent. Projects that require sustained funding across decades face an insurmountable problem. Political cycles are measured in years, not generations. A Mars colonization program would need unwavering support across multiple administrations through economic recessions, wars, pandemics, and the endless shifting of political priorities. It would need to survive changes in leadership, ideology, and public mood. History suggests this is fantasy. When costs mount, when disasters occur, when the public questions the expense, programs are cut. The first death on Mars, the first failed mission, the first budget crisis or competing emergency would threaten the entire enterprise. No democratic government has ever sustained a multi-trillion-dollar project across the timescales required for Mars colonization, and there is no reason to believe any will. Enter the billionaires, the private sector saviors who promise to succeed where governments cannot. We are told that private companies driven by innovation and efficiency will make Mars colonization economically viable. This narrative is compelling but fundamentally dishonest. No private company can sustain the losses required for Mars colonization without a path to profitability, and no such path exists. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and their competitors are funded by fortunes built on Earth, selling products and services to Earth-based customers. The moment those revenue streams dry up, or the moment investors demand returns, the Mars ambitions collapse. The idea that a private company would spend hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions, on Mars operations with no realistic hope of profit is not a business plan. It is philanthropy on a scale never before seen, and philanthropy rarely survives the death of its founder or the pressure of shareholders. Even if a billionaire personally commits their entire fortune to Mars, fortunes are finite and Mars is expensive. When Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos are no longer leading their companies, will their successors continue funding an unprofitable venture? Will boards of directors approve endless losses for symbolic achievements? The private sector illusion rests on the assumption that capitalism can be bent toward unprofitable goals indefinitely. It cannot. Moreover, the legal and ethical frameworks for commercial Mars operations don't exist. Who is liable when colonists die from radiation, equipment failure, or medical emergencies? What insurance company would underwrite missions with mortality rates potentially exceeding 50%? How do you obtain informed consent from civilians when the risks are catastrophic and the emergency escape options are non-existent? The Outer Space Treaty prohibits national appropriation of celestial bodies, making property rights on Mars legally ambiguous at best. Without clear ownership, without legal frameworks for resource extraction, without liability protections, no rational investor would fund large-scale Mars operations. The regulatory and legal infrastructure alone would take decades to establish, if international consensus could even be reached, which is doubtful. Public support, the foundation of both government funding and private investment, is fragile and easily shattered. Current enthusiasm for Mars is built on optimism, CGI renderings, and the carefully curated narratives of charismatic advocates, but public opinion shifts rapidly when confronted with reality. The first time taxpayers see the actual price tag, not abstract promises, but concrete budget allocations diverting funds from schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, support will erode. The first time families watch loved ones die on Mars with no hope of rescue, broadcast in real time across global media, the romance will vanish. The first time cost overruns are announced, the first time timelines are delayed by decades, the first time the public realizes that Mars colonization offers them nothing tangible, nothing that improves their lives, nothing but vicarious pride, support will collapse. We have seen this before. Public enthusiasm for the moon landings peaked with Apollo 11 and declined rapidly afterward. By Apollo 17, television networks barely covered the missions. The public grew bored, then indifferent, then resentful of the costs. Mars would follow the same trajectory, but with far higher stakes and far less tangible achievement. Landing on the moon took days and could be completed in a single mission. Colonizing Mars takes years per mission and requires indefinite commitment. The patience required exceeds what democratic societies have historically been willing to grant. And then there is the elephant in the room, the comparison that makes Mars colonization seem not just impractical, but morally grotesque. Humanity currently stands on a planet with breathable air, drinkable water, fertile soil, and ecosystems that have sustained life for billions of years. Yet we are struggling, failing even, to maintain its habitability. Climate change threatens coastal cities, agricultural systems, and the stability of civilization itself. We have not yet mustered the political will or economic resources to prevent the degradation of the only naturally habitable world we know. In this context, the proposal to spend trillions making Mars barely survivable is obscene. Why would we invest unimaginable sums to create a hostile environment slightly less hostile when we cannot maintain the paradise we already inhabit? It is easier to prevent Earth's temperature from rising 2 degrees than to warm Mars by 100. It is easier to clean Earth's atmosphere than to create one on Mars from nothing. It is easier to preserve Earth's biodiversity than to transport life across interplanetary space and sustain it in artificial habitats. Every argument for terraforming Mars is an argument we should first apply to Earth, where the conditions are infinitely more favorable and the stakes infinitely higher. The advocates respond that Mars is a backup, an insurance policy against extinction. But this argument crumbles under examination. A Mars colony dependent on Earth for supplies, technology, and genetic diversity is not a backup. It is a remote outpost that dies the moment Earth does. A truly independent Mars colony would require tens of thousands of people, complete industrial capacity, and genetic diversity sufficient to avoid inbreeding, all sustained without Earth support for generations. The cost and complexity of achieving this exceeds anything humanity has ever attempted. If we possess the resources to create a self-sufficient civilization on Mars, we possess the resources to prevent any catastrophe on Earth short of the sun exploding, which won't happen for billions of years. The economic and political reality is simple. brutal and final. No government will sustain the costs. No corporation will accept the losses. No public will maintain support once the price becomes real. Mars colonization is not deferred by technical challenges that will eventually be overcome. It is rendered impossible by economic and political realities that will never change. The dream persists only because its true costs remain abstract, hidden behind optimistic timelines and unexamined assumptions. In the silence of budget meetings, in the cold calculations of return on investment, in the shifting priorities of election cycles, the Martian dream dies quietly. Not with a dramatic failure, but with a slow evaporation of will. The rockets will be repurposed. The funding will be reallocated. The timelines will slip from decades to centuries, then fade into the realm of someday, never. Mars will remain what it has always been, a distant dead world that captures our imagination but defies our economics. And perhaps that is as it should be, for the greatest human achievements are not born from running away, but from facing the challenges before us here, on the only world we've ever called home. Beyond the radiation, beyond the bone loss, beyond the technical impossibilities, there lies a deeper question that we have avoided asking. Why Mars? What drives this obsession with a planet that seems determined to kill us? The answer is not found in science or engineering, but in something far more elusive: human mythology. We tell ourselves stories about Mars, narratives of frontier spirit and species survival, of backup planets and manifest destiny among the stars. These stories are compelling, inspiring even, but they are stories nonetheless, and like all myths, they reveal more about our fears and fantasies than about the reality we face. The backup planet fallacy sits at the heart of the Mars mythology. We are told that humanity needs a second home, that Earth is fragile, that civilization could end at any moment from climate change, nuclear war, or asteroid impact. Mars, in this narrative, becomes our insurance policy, our plan B. It is a seductive idea. If Earth becomes uninhabitable, we simply move to Mars. Problem solved. Except this reasoning contains a fundamental logical flaw so obvious it is astonishing how often it goes unexamined. Consider the worst-case scenarios for Earth. Runaway climate change that raises global temperatures by 10 degrees, nuclear winter that blocks out the sun, an asteroid strike that fills the atmosphere with debris. These are catastrophic events. Civilization ending, perhaps, but they do not make Earth less habitable than Mars. Even in Earth's most devastated state, even after the worst disasters our species can imagine, this planet would still have breathable air, liquid water, atmospheric pressure, a protective magnetic field, and temperatures within survivable ranges. Mars, on its best day, has none of these things and never will. The coldest, most irradiated, most resource-depleted version of Earth is still exponentially more habitable than Mars could ever be made. If we possess the technology to terraform Mars, to give it a breathable atmosphere, to warm its frozen surface, to shield it from radiation, then we already possess the technology to fix Earth. It would be thousands of times easier to reverse climate change, clean polluted oceans, or even rebuild after nuclear war than to transform an entire planet from a sterile wasteland into a garden. The backup planet argument collapses under its own logic. Mars is not our safety net. It is a distraction from the work we must do here. Yet the mythology persists, and it persists because it taps into something deeper than logic. It echoes with the ghosts of manifest destiny, that 19th century American ideology that proclaimed westward expansion as inevitable, righteous, and ordained by fate. The frontier was always there, always calling, always promising redemption through movement. When one territory was conquered, another appeared beyond the horizon. And when Earth's frontiers closed, when every continent had been mapped and every wilderness claimed, we simply lifted our eyes to the stars and found new frontiers waiting in the darkness. Mars has become our new West, an empty canvas onto which we project our fantasies of renewal and escape. We speak of Mars colonists as pioneers, as if the challenges they would face are merely scaled-up versions of crossing the prairie in covered wagons. We imagine dome cities rising from the red dust like frontier towns, bold settlers carving out new lives through determination and grit. It is a powerful mythology, one that resonates with cultural memories of exploration and expansion. But like the original Manifest Destiny, it conveniently ignores the reality of what such expansion would actually entail. The original frontier mythology overlooked the indigenous peoples already living on the land, the environmental destruction that followed in expansion's wake, and the countless settlers who died from disease, starvation, and exposure. The Mars mythology commits similar oversights. It glosses over the physiological destruction that awaits anyone who tries to live there. It minimizes the psychological toll of permanent exile on a lifeless world. It presents colonization as an adventure rather than a sentence to slow death by radiation and bone loss. And perhaps most tellingly, it is promoted most loudly by those who would never go themselves. This brings us to the billionaire escape fantasy, one of the most insidious aspects of the Mars mythology. In recent decades, Mars colonization has become the personal crusade of wealthy tech entrepreneurs who frame it as humanity's grand destiny, while simultaneously accumulating unprecedented fortunes. The narrative is always the same. Earth is doomed, Mars is salvation, and only through private enterprise and visionary leadership can we reach the stars. It is a story that serves multiple purposes, none of them scientific. First, it provides moral justification for extreme wealth accumulation. If you are building rockets to save humanity, then your billions are not obscene, they are necessary. The factories, the carbon emissions, the labor exploitation, all of it becomes acceptable because it serves the greater goal of species survival. Second, it offers a form of legacy, a way for the ultra-wealthy to be remembered not as mere capitalists, but as benefactors of human civilization, as the architects of our multiplanetary future. And third, perhaps most importantly, it shifts focus away from Earth's problems and toward a distant fantasy that requires no immediate sacrifice or change in behavior. While we debate Mars colonies that may never exist, Earth's climate continues to warm, inequality continues to widen, and the resources that could address these immediate crises are instead funneled into rockets designed to reach a planet where humans cannot survive. The Mars mythology becomes a distraction, a way to maintain the status quo while pretending to work toward a better future. It allows us to feel hopeful about humanity's destiny without confronting the systems and choices that threaten our present. The species survival argument represents another pillar of the Mars mythology, and it too crumbles upon examination. We are told that humanity must become multiplanetary to ensure our long-term survival, that keeping all our eggs in one basket is foolish, that Mars colonization is essential insurance against existential risks. This sounds prudent, almost obvious, but it fundamentally misunderstands both the nature of existential risks and the realities of Martian colonization. Consider the catastrophes that could end human civilization on Earth. asteroid impact, supervolcano eruption, nuclear war, engineered pandemic, runaway artificial intelligence, or climate collapse. Now imagine a small, fragile colony on Mars, utterly dependent on technology, completely reliant on supplies and support from Earth, housing perhaps a few hundred or thousand people at most. How does this colony survive when Earth falls silent, when the resupply missions stop coming, when the communication channels go dark? A Martian colony would not be independent. It would be the most dependent human settlement ever created, requiring constant support from Earth for decades or centuries before it could even theoretically sustain itself. In any scenario where Earth civilization collapses, the Martian colony dies within months, perhaps weeks. It does not save humanity. It merely extends our extinction by a brief epilogue played out on a frozen desert beneath a black sky. If we genuinely want to protect humanity from existential risks, there are far more effective approaches. We could build self-sustaining seed vaults and knowledge repositories deep underground. We could establish rotating research stations in Earth orbit or at Lagrange points, close enough to return to Earth but distant enough to survive most planetary catastrophes. We could develop closed-loop biosphere systems here on Earth, proving the technology works before attempting it on another world. We could invest in asteroid detection and deflection, pandemic prevention, nuclear disarmament, and climate stabilization. All of these strategies address existential risks more effectively than Mars colonization, and all are achievable with current technology. But these solutions lack the grandeur of Mars. They do not fire the imagination or promise escape from Earth's problems. They require us to stay here, to fix what we have broken, to accept that there is no frontier waiting to absolve us of our mistakes. They ask us to be stewards rather than pioneers, gardeners rather than conquistadors. And perhaps this is why the Mars mythology persists despite all evidence against it. It offers us a story in which we remain the heroes, adventurers pushing boundaries, rather than the more uncomfortable truth. We are caretakers of a fragile world responsible for the damage we've done. So what should we do instead? How do we maintain our ambition for space while being honest about human limitations? The answer lies not in abandoning space exploration, but in reframing it, in pursuing goals that are both inspiring and achievable. Near-Earth space infrastructure should be our primary focus. Space stations, orbital platforms, and lunar bases offer most of the scientific and technological benefits of Mars colonization without the insurmountable challenges. Low Earth orbit is close enough that rescue and resupply are measured in hours, not months. Rotating crews can return to Earth's gravity before permanent damage occurs. The Moon, though still hostile, is close enough that we could realistically establish research stations that serve as proving grounds for life support systems, resource extraction, and closed-loop habitats. If we cannot make lunar bases sustainable, we certainly cannot do it on Mars. Robotic exploration should continue and expand. Robots do not need air, do not suffer bone loss, and do not require return trips. They can explore Mars, Europa, Titan, and countless other worlds, sending back data that expands human knowledge without risking human lives. The scientific return per dollar invested in robotic missions far exceeds crewed missions. Our rovers and landers have revolutionized our understanding of Mars. Imagine what fleets of advanced robots could discover across the solar system, exploring lava tubes, drilling through ice, analyzing soil chemistry, all while we safely observe from Earth. Most importantly, we must focus on solving Earth's problems first. This is not a retreat from ambition. It is the ultimate test of our species' capability. Can we build sustainable cities? Can we reverse environmental damage? Can we create closed-loop systems where waste becomes resource? If we can do this on Earth, a planet that already has everything we need, then perhaps one day, with vastly better technology, we might genuinely be ready for Mars. But until we prove we can live sustainably on the one habitable planet in the known universe, we have no business pretending we can colonize one where survival is impossible. The real future of Mars is not permanent colonization, but something more modest and more realistic. Research stations with rotating crews, similar to Antarctic bases or the International Space Station. Scientists and engineers who spend months or a few years on Mars conducting research, then return to Earth before the damage becomes permanent. Robotic infrastructure that mines resources, produces fuel, and prepares supplies for future missions. Gradual technology development that might over centuries make longer stays possible. This is not the glorious destiny promised by the mythology, but it is achievable, sustainable, and scientifically valuable. We can reframe human ambition in space not as conquest, but as exploration, not as escape, but as curiosity. The universe is full of wonders worth studying, mysteries worth investigating, and beauty worth witnessing. We do not need to live on Mars to appreciate its canyons, to study its geology, to search for signs of ancient life. We do not need permanent colonies to benefit from space research, satellite technology, or the perspective that comes from seeing Earth as a fragile blue jewel suspended in darkness. Human limitations are not failures to overcome. They are realities to respect. We evolved for Earth, and Earth remains our home. The radiation will not care about our determination. The low gravity will not bend to our willpower. Mars will remain Mars, indifferent to our dreams and mythologies, patiently waiting in the darkness, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhospitable to human life. The brutal truth is that we will never live on Mars, not in any permanent, sustainable sense. But this truth does not diminish us. It refocuses us. It asks us to direct our energy, creativity, and resources toward challenges we can actually solve, toward making Earth the thriving, sustainable home it could be, toward exploring space in ways that respect both cosmic reality and human biology. The wonder of the universe remains. The desire to explore remains. What changes is our honesty about what is possible and what is fantasy. And perhaps in accepting this reality, we discover something more valuable than Mars colonization, the recognition that this pale blue dot, this ordinary planet circling an ordinary star, is not our prison but our miracle. We do not need a backup planet. We need to care for the one we have. We have journeyed through the realities of Mars, not with the romantic lens of science fiction, but with the unforgiving clarity of physics, biology, and economics. And now, as we reach the end of this voyage, we must confront what all the evidence has shown us. Mars is not our future home. It is a graveyard waiting to claim those foolish enough to ignore the warnings written in its dust and radiation-soaked skies. 6 insurmountable barriers stand between humanity and the fantasy of Martian colonization. The radiation that tears through DNA with invisible violence, the physiological breakdown of muscle, bone, and mind in reduced gravity and isolation, the crushing scarcity of resources on a planet with no breathable air, no liquid water, and soil laced with toxins, the tyranny of distance that transforms every supply mission into a years-long gamble with human lives, the economic impossibility of sustaining a colony that costs trillions while producing nothing of value, and perhaps most devastating of all, the political and philosophical delusion that drives us to abandon Earth rather than fix it. These are not engineering challenges waiting for clever solutions. They are fundamental laws of nature, immutable truths that do not bend to human ambition or billionaire fantasies, yet the myth persists. Space agencies speak in vague timelines, always pushing the goal just beyond the next decade. Billionaires sell Mars as humanity's backup plan, conveniently ignoring that no amount of wealth can purchase immunity from cosmic radiation or bone density loss. The public is fed a steady diet of optimism, of rendered images showing gleaming habitats beneath rust-coloured skies, while the brutal mathematics of survival are quietly buried in technical reports few will ever read. This dishonesty matters. Every dollar, every moment of scientific effort directed toward the impossible dream of Mars colonization is a resource stolen from endeavors that could actually save lives and expand human knowledge. We live in an era where Earth faces existential challenges, climate collapse, ecological destruction, resource depletion. Yet instead of addressing these solvable problems on a habitable planet, we fantasize about terraforming a dead one. But accepting this reality does not mean abandoning space. It means embracing what we can truly achieve. Robotic exploration has already revealed wonders beyond imagination. Rovers traverse alien landscapes, drilling into ancient rocks, searching for signs of past life. Orbiters map the planet in exquisite detail, unraveling the mysteries of its vanished oceans and lost atmosphere. These machines, immune to radiation, indifferent to isolation, requiring no food or water, are the true pioneers of Mars. They will continue this work long after the colonization fantasies have faded. Closer to home, humanity has real potential. Space stations that rotate to generate artificial gravity, lunar bases shielded by regolith, and mere days from Earth, asteroid mining operations that could revolutionize resource access without condemning humans to slow death on distant worlds. These are achievable goals, practical steps that expand our presence in space without demanding martyrdom. Mars will remain what it has always been, a distant world of scientific fascination, a testing ground for robotic ingenuity, and most importantly, a stark reminder of how rare and precious Earth truly is. In the cold Martian winds, in the poisoned soil, in the relentless radiation, we see clearly what we risk losing if we fail to protect the only world that has ever welcomed life. The journey through space teaches us that distance is not just measured in miles, but in the gap between fantasy and reality. And sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is not to reach for impossible dreams, but to face the truth with clear eyes. If this documentary has challenged your perspective or opened your eyes to realities often ignored, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're listening from, what you thought, and whether you're ready for more brutally honest explorations of science and space. Subscribe for content that refuses to sell you comforting lies. Because the universe doesn't care about our fantasies, it only responds to truth.